Hey, this is Dave from metalepidemic.com. Thank you for checking out our YouTube video. Please feel free to hit the subscribe button below if you like this type of content, and we hope you enjoy the review. What's up, guys? Dave here from Metal Epidemic, joined by my man Duncan for another album review. For this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from Texan groove metalers Piss and Razors. The band's new album, Eulogy Death March, is out now. The album may be out already, but as you well know, I will take any opportunity to talk about Piss and Razors at length.
Sometimes opportunities aren't even there, you'll just segue that right in.
Occasionally I occasionally do. This was inevitable, really, wasn't it? Plus it's like their first album, 18 years, something
I was
like that?
trying to work this out. So for a while there we were hardcore Piss and Razors, you more than I. Safe to say, I didn't get into them until Fields of Disbelief, and then they only did 2 albums after that, I think.
After Fields, yeah, they did Where We Come From and Evolution, I think was the 2.
I think that was it. Yeah. So, yeah. And that was a while ago. So,
yeah, 2003, I think was the last
2003, one. Fucking hell. So yeah, so it's been a minute, is what we're saying.
Yeah, it's been a wee while. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you know the kind of the background, the history of the band, I'm not going to go into that, by the way, just in case you're thinking, oh shit, he's going to go into the whole background.
I thought you were about to say, picture the year 1995, which is a guess. I don't know if they formed in 95 before we get hate mail from someone saying, actually, it was 94. I don't know when they formed, but it was for comedic effect.
Yeah. The lineup changed a bit over the last kind of few albums before they split in 2004. But for Eulogy Death March, we have Eddie Garcia, the OG, on drums, who has pretty much remained the band's drummer throughout their full career. We've got Joe Rodriguez back on vocals, who was on the first 4 albums. Matt Lynch on guitars, who was on the first 3 albums, and then Gio Gomez on bass, who joined the band in 2015. So this is, technically his first Piss and Razors album. This album feels like it's been teased for what feels like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, I don't know, a long time.
I have a vague memory. I have a very, very, very vague memory tagging you something, and something on Facebook, of all places, tagging I think they changed their profile picture. It'd be the first change on that page in about a decade or something. I remember being like that, what does this mean, Dave? And we were like, oh, new album. And little did we know we would have to wait a long time. I mean, they were active. They were busy last year and into this year teasing stuff. So
I think when we were doing Rock and Reel reviews back in the day, I'm sure I spoke to Matt at some point and they were talking about an album back then, and that would be probably about 2014, 2015, something like that. But as you said, over the last couple of years, definitely, things have ramped up. They've started, dropping teasers and a couple of tracks,
actual physical tracks, where that was a good indicator. And usually I'm the guy that bitches about they're releasing too much stuff before the album. I'm that guy, right?
Yeah.
But in the case of this one, it was a kind of interesting indicator as to what we were getting from Piss and Razors, because lineup changes aside, which they've had, they've stayed fairly consistent to their sound. They haven't deviated that far from it, and I would say to their benefit. The big dynamic changes have mostly come in the form of vocalists who have different ranges, and that's really the kind of the seasoning on top of the steak, so to speak, when it comes to the actual band. But the kind of the drums up front and groove riffs have been the staple of Piss and Razors since the beginning, and it didn't sound like they were moving far, if at all, anywhere from what they released. So I was coming into this one optimistic AF, Dave.
Yeah. Me also. The release was recorded at Crank Recording Studios by Razor Records and mixed and mastered by Sterling Winfield, who obviously had worked with like Pantera and bands like Hell Yeah, at Boot Hill Studios. So, where to begin?
The first 10 seconds of this album was like, oh, we're here, right? That's fine. like just that like bass drum and just you're like, oh, what the fuck is going on here?
I know. I think like the first thing that kind of hit me was really how much Eulogy was, how much it kind of sounds like a band in the studio. There was something very kind of natural about this album, the way it's been kind of captured. It feels very organic. It doesn't feel like it's been overly fucked with on the production side of things. We obviously listen to a lot of a ridiculous amount of music every month that comes in for review, and a large kind of portion of the more kind of modern metal albums feel highly and very, very produced. Especially the more kind of tech heavy bands. Like Kyle has mentioned it on a number of occasions. The drums are often
that's why he's not here on this review.
He's not on this one. The drums are often like time aligned, or replaced with samples or triggered. That I didn't get that impression at all with this.
I get the feeling that's just not how Eddie Garcia rolls.
No.
I get a feeling that he's supremely confident. Like he's behind most of their production in the past as well. So I get a feel that he knows.
Yeah.
What he's doing, he knows what his setup is, and he knows how to go, and that's it.
Yeah, the drums in particular didn't feel like even like digitally corrected or mechanical in any way. They've left a lot of that kind of natural feel in the album, which I really admire. Because a lot of bands, do correct those little kind of, details, little things they're not happy with, or it's not super tight enough, then they'll, line it up. And this does sound still very, very tight, but it feels human at the same time. It kind of reminded me in a way of like their very first album, Psycho Punko Metal Groove from like '96,
which is finally available on streaming sites.
Yeah.
Like they went through they did the Tool thing.
Yeah.
Except he did it in a kind of a sneakier, smarter. I would argue smarter way in that like every other month they released one of their back catalogue digitally, digitally remastered, but in digital. Media on streaming sites building up to this. So if you were wanting to try and get in to Piss and Razors, there was a clear through line of what to do. So
True.
And I don't think I'd heard that album.
No,
like, I think that was the first time I'd heard it, and I was kind of blown away. And as one of the comments I'll mention about this later on, I was kind of blown away by how weirdly timeless Piss and Razors actually sound. You know what I mean? Like you listen to this, it still sounds like a modern metal album, but that genre, that kind of groove metal genre, hasn't really changed that much since it came to prominence in the mid 90s. It stayed pretty much the same, and where other genres feel a bit dated, or you go, oh, that's classic groove metal, you don't say that, it's just a groove metal album. And that's kind of what like you can go back and listen to that early stuff, you can go and listen to this stuff, and it's not clear that there's obviously production, but it's not clear that the sound is moved on that much at all, or that it needs to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think like this album for me was a really good mix of kind of old Piss and Razors and a bit of new Piss and Razors as well. There are moments where it does feel like a throwback to some of the early Piss and Razors material, but for me it didn't feel like we were covering old ground either. I think there is a bit of a freshness to this that kind of makes the album stand on its own. That being said, what I would say is I thought the opening track was probably one of the least interesting tracks for me on this album. It's full of punch and it brings very high energy, which they often go for on an album opener. I just didn't think it was the strongest song they could have opened the album with. My issue with this one more than the other ones is that it starts off with a really interesting bit of guitar and drum work. Yeah. And it does that, and I'm like, this is fucking nuts. And then it does the classic, which is all over this album, by the way. They give you a groove and they give you a rhythm, and then they completely change either what the drums are doing but keep the guitar constant, or they change the guitar but keep the drums constant to add a new dimension. And this one, when they did that, when they made the switch into what is the main riff of this album, it's just very beige compared to everything else you get. It feels very, not paint by numbers, but a very safe riff. Yeah. Compared to the
it's not polyrhythms, but like for the uneducated ear, it sounds like a polyrhythm at the start. I was like, what the fuck are they doing here? Where's the loop? And then you obviously you find the groove, and then follow it through. But it doesn't, like, that was the only thing that kind of surprised me. But in terms of, I suppose if you're going for opening tracks, is maybe not the strongest opening track. If you're going for strongest opening 20 seconds, it's definitely the most strong. Like it catches your attention.
That's
like,
true.
Straight away, triggers
That's
it.
True.
So
yeah. I mean, as you say, it's got the grooves, it's got the synchronized guitars and bass drum patterns, the tonal vocals, as you'd expect from a Piss and Razor song. I just I kept waiting for it to grab me, and it never really happened. I was more like, yeah, that's cool. Sounds like Piss and Razors. But after that track, though, I felt like the album does get better and more interesting as it goes on.
Opens up quite a bit towards the end as well. They really start playing it, especially with the groove stuff. They start playing with almost kind of Pantera style, like kind of melodic chords that they start mixing in, which I think just gives them a depth that I don't think they really used on many of the other ones. Maybe see for something like Evolution, which had those elements in it. They clearly brought that back, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah. The second track though, Unsee. The thing that kicked or kind of stood out for me in that one was the bass tone. Like the bass tone on that is thick, like really thick.
5 C's.
5 C's thick. It's just like those plus the little rhythms, the start and stop moments on that track, they totally hooked me in. I mean, and then that big kind of bendy groove riff in the middle, I was just like, yeah, now we're talking. It was a far more engaging track for me than the opener, in my opinion. I think the first kind of album highlight for me though was Chemical Burn, track 3. It's got the pace, it's got the hooks, it's got the chunky riffs, but it's also got this almost like a kind of metallic kind of Seven Dust vibe. Especially when Joe starts doing more of a kind of tonal vocal. And I think as a vocalist, I think he shows here he's only got better age. I think like you go back to like Fields of Disbelief for me is like an outstanding album. His tone is visceral on that album, utterly savage. But when you listen to him now, he's still got that like grit and venom, but his melody is almost just as good as his kind of screaming voice.
Yeah, almost 20 years on.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Or is it 20 years on? 2000, 2001, I think it's Fields of Disbelief, isn't it? It's not 99.
No, it was 99. Probably 2000 or 2001, yeah.
So 20 years on.
Yeah.
Fucking nuts.
That is nuts. I think those sections where he adds a kind of touch of melody to the lines he's delivering are really catchy in places on this album. I really liked the kind of melodic ideas on Result of Virtue as well. I had a really good balance of like old and new Piss and Razors. There were moments that took me right back to like Cast Down the Plague or Fields of Disbelief, especially those parts where Eddie starts that kind of playing the ride on the offbeat. It's like very like Cast Down the Plague, and there's not enough metal drummers utilise the ride. There just isn't. You know what I mean? Like, and when I hear it in this album, just like, yes, drummers should use more ride. Absolutely, like it's 100%.
Amazing. Just don't use it on the same bit that they all use it on when they want to slow things down and they're just going to play a little.
Absolutely.
He's a very for those, like, I always feel like people don't know Piss and Razors. It's not because they've been away for so long. I just feel like they're never in the conversation when anyone's talking about anything. And I think in a lot of respects they're one of the smarter bands of that ilk, and most of it comes down to the drums. He's a very, very inventive drummer.
Absolutely.
Like he's always active. There's no bit where you feel like, all right, that's kind of standard. He never does a section like that. Every bit of every section that he's playing drums on kind of feels like he's thought of the most interesting way to play it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was one of the reasons he was such a kind of big inspiration for me. Like, we were just kind of getting into bands in the late 90s. I was kind of trying to find my style as a drummer at that point, and listening to bands like Piss and Razors and Eddie was just like listening to that and thinking, wow, like listen to the changes and just the way he plays. This was really kind of inspirational for me. So it's great to hear, like, all those years later, he's still just top of his game, to be honest, on this. I think the title track was really cool. I really liked the title track on this. It's got a very like kind of tribal type intro, almost kind of like newer kind of Sepultura, not like Max era, but the kind of newer kind of Derek Green era. and then there was later riffs on that song as well, kind of reminded me of kind of newer Sepultura. But the track has also got some really, really cool clean vocals from Joe, which I really enjoyed hearing him experiment more with that on this album. He did a little bit of it, back in the day on the older albums, but this time he seems to kind of fully have kind of embraced it on this one, which I really liked. The last kind of third of the album, I think, is where it starts to really pick up the momentum of the album. There's the riffs are just far more kind of driving forward. Tracks like Pulverized or Crush and Grip, and Nothing to Say as well. And they felt very like classic Piss and Razors in places, like very, those kind of grooves that they're known for. Nothing to Say in particular had some really cool like kind of bends in the riffs, very Pantera in places, as you mentioned. Sharpened World is one of the coolest breakdowns on the album, right in the middle of the track. And then it goes to a kind of more like full-on kind of thrash attack in the end. And then closing the album, you've got Die for the Crown, which was a little bit kind of darker in tone, but it's got a really kind of cool build to it. And then some, like the time changes are really slick on that album. It's just like, as you said, they transition into these really different kind of odd, not odd time signatures, but just the change in pace and change in rhythm are just like so spot on. And Eddie, you can hear him really kind of improvising on that last track as well, just little fills and little kind of add-ons that are really cool. I'm obviously a mark for this type of stuff.
Really?
Piss and Razors
I'm surprised you didn't show up with your Piss and Razors t-shirt on. No, just the boxers, Duncan, just the boxers.
This is like, it's a very solid like Piss and Razors album for me. If I'm honest, I didn't think the last album they put out in 2003 was the strongest. It's probably my least favourite album of theirs. But it was a very like different lineup back at that point. It was like completely different guitarists, vocalists and all that back then. This feels more like a return to the Piss and Razors I have like fond memories of. So I'm really glad they've decided to come back and do another album. Obviously we've had like 20 years or more of listening to those old albums, those early albums. So I would say there's probably still a couple of their early albums that I would put in front of this. Purely because I've been listening to them for so long, and they're like almost tattooed on my brain forever. But I think this is another great addition to their catalogue, and I kind of loved hearing that they didn't just decide to put out an album of the kind of same old ideas. Although there's classic Piss and Razors moments on this, it doesn't feel like they've just put out a regurgitated version of an old album. It feels more varied, kind of musically and vocally, especially in some of the early albums. Also feels a bit more upbeat. Like I felt like if you go back to like Cast Down the Plague, it has a real dark side to it. It feels very ominous. This album doesn't really have that. It's still
They're
heavy.
older.
Yeah, they are older.
That's what happens. All bands mellow with age. No, I mean mellow in terms of just their sound. You can't be as snarled and pissed off as you were 25. I hope I'm not. I'm certainly far more chilled than I was 20 years ago. But I think that inevitably comes. I think there's the genre that they play in lends itself to a more optimistic tone. Which is why those early albums stand out as much as they do, because there is that kind of real kind of gnarly darkness behind the surface all the way through what they're doing, which has become very fashionable now in other genres. But something about the groove stuff's always kind of relatively positive. I mean, if you once again, if you're going to like talk about like that genre, Pantera is the one you inevitably go to. Pantera gets fucking dark. It's a song about rape on one of their albums, which is very unpleasant to listen to, and God knows what else. But they could still sing songs about stuff that was more upbeat. So
that's true. I mean, I think these guys they're still managing to capture that heaviness, but there's a slightly brighter mood to it overall, which I think we quite we kind of need in this dumpster fire of a world right now. So. I'm glad they finally got the album out. After speaking about it for so long and teasing it and stuff, I'm really glad to hear they've released it. I just need them to come to Scotland now so I can see them live. That's just like that's the last thing on the bucket list. Really.
Yeah,
I just need to see them over here. So that would be great if they can come to Scotland. That would be ideal, perfect. I'd even contemplate going down to England somewhere if they announced like a one-off. I would seriously consider going down to see them down there. as much as that pains me. I would. What about yourself? Did you enjoy the rest of this as much as I did?
I mean, there are a few bands that can take the level of hiatus between albums that Piss and Razors have that have come back with an album that sounds as accomplished, and it sounds like they've not missed a beat at all. It genuinely sounds like the band have just been playing all the time in that absence, and I kind of love that about it. Like, you could easily like listen through to like Evolution hit stop at the at the end, and then right into In Spite of My Scars, and it doesn't sound like you're getting, like you said before, a version of the band where you're like, oh no, what are you doing? If anything, the best of that album, I'm probably with you, Evolution's maybe the one where I kind of felt like they were not losing their way, but like they were trying to put albums out as opposed to trying to write albums, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Kind of felt like we've got a record contract here, we need to just get this last one out, and then we can take a bit of time off and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, this album is like, it doesn't really like it is surprisingly consistent. Like that, I don't dislike one song on this album at all, even a little bit. And I would agree with you. I don't think it necessarily opens with their best song, but in a lot of respects, I think that works for the album because your attention is grabbed for sure, and it may not floor you, but then the album just goes off from there. Like, you get through that first song, and then everything after that is going off in slightly different variations of the core sound. Drum wise, and it's hard to not talk about the drums when talking about Piss and Razors because they are so still even now so prominent in the mix, man. It's one of the more drum heavy bands you'll listen to out with a fucking Slipknot, and they've got 3 drummers, and that's why. It's so they never settle on anything.
No.
In any song. Like, they're always trying to mix things up and keep things varied. In a lot of respects, what they do reminds me a lot of, like, in kind of not necessarily tech death metal, but bands that are starting to traverse the tech metal side, where you get a riff and then we're gonna try variations of that, and we're gonna mix things up with the drums and different timings and slow it down, speed it up. Like, Piss and Razors are awash with that. The entire album is full of bits that just, you're like, oh, that's a really cool riff. And the drums are maybe just, they're on the offbeat, or they're doing something you're like, right, I mean, that's a cool riff. And then they find a groove, but then the riff changes, you're like, what are we doing here? All the way through it. And every song where you feel like you've heard the best riff, there's another bit that comes along and it's like, no, well, this is the best riff. And I just love that about it. I'm glad you mentioned the vocals. I think vocally this is a fucking tremendous album. I love his lyrics. I love like specifically the tones, and I love the fact that he feels a disbelief. I had moments on it where he is doing the tonal stuff, but it almost felt like it's not a great mix in that album vocally. If you know what I mean. At times the vocals, no offense to the drums, are not as loud as I would like to hear them in the mix, especially when he's hitting lower notes. They kind of almost vanish beneath the guitars. On this one, clear as a bell and everything, and I would agree. I think vocally he's stronger now than he was then, which, when you've got a voice like that, that's almost like mathematically impossible. You're not supposed to get a gritty tone like that is not supposed to age better. You put him in maybe the Meshuggah singer in that camp of vocalists that somehow get better doing that weird kind of gritty style longer. But yeah, it works perfectly, and I once again, I'm glad that he opens himself up and does a bit of clean. The guitar stuff is excellent on this album. Though. I think this to me is the first time in a long time where I felt that there's more to come from a Piss and Razors album. Like, when Feels of Disbelief finishes, you are spent. You've like heard every groove riff that's ever been written, every drum fill that's ever been made, like, and you're just like, oh, but at the end of this album, I was like, these guys could go in tomorrow and write an equally as interesting fucking album, and just keep going. They legitimately feel like they have not missed a beat, and they feel tighter now in a lot of respects than they did then. And like you say, I got no impression of any studio wizardry, even though I'm terrible at picking that out. But I think every instrument, clear as a bell. The bass sound is fucking amazing.
Yep.
And like, it's so easy to overlook that, specifically in guitar and drum heavy music, is to just forget that bass, but it's so prominent. It's a great album. It's one of those albums that kind of, you get a bit nervous. You get a bit nervous when you're the bands that you grew up listening to that went away for a while and then a comeback, because that comeback album could easily tarnish a legacy.
Yeah.
And I think they've just improved it. I think they've, in a lot of respects, one could say, like, when Rambo 4 came out, stick with me here, Dave. When Rambo 4 came out, I was like, do we need a new Rambo movie? I mean, at the end of it, he rescued that colonel guy from Afghanistan. Do we need a new one? And then I saw him rip a man's throat out. I was like, yes, this whole fucking endeavour has been worth it.
Yeah.
Piss and Razors is an album full of throat rips. Like, honestly, just when you thought to yourself, I need another Piss and Razors, like almost every song on this one is a stark reminder of why Piss and Razors are just as relevant now as they've ever been. And yeah, well played. It's a great album. I had a ton of fun listening to it.
Yeah. Okay, so ratings for this one. I need to be careful with this one because
you'll just go, you'll like
it's hard not to give them a high score because I love the band so much, but I'm trying to just like focus on this album.
Yeah. Put your reviewer goggles on.
I really need to. If I'm totally honest with myself, and I need to be, like, Fields of Disbelief is my favourite album. Like today, it's for me, it's a 5-star album. It doesn't get better than that. Cast Down the Plague is close as well. It's like a 4.5. It's a fucking stunning album as well. I think this sits just beneath that. I think I would probably go in at a 4 out of 5. If I'm being honest with myself, and I'm not just giving all the love to this band because I really do love them, I would probably go 4 out of 5 on this one. What about you? What do you think?
It's a 4 album. Yeah, you're not wrong. It's a 4-star album. And I challenge anyone to find like a band that are this far on in their career, that are playing this genre of music and doing it as well as Piss and Razors. I was thinking about this today, how many great groove metal albums I've heard this year, and I can't, honestly, I'm still struggling. I'm sure there have been some out there that we have talked about, but nothing as creative and consistently interesting from song to song as Piss and Razors. So 4. And this is it inspired me to go back and listen to some of those albums that I've not listened to in a long time, and get down a weird rabbit hole of fucking some bizarre music, which took me right back to being in college. So I'm glad they're back. I think Eulogy Death March is a triumph for the band, and it might not be a 5-star album, but don't fucking sleep on this one. I get the feeling that even now we're still going to have to bang the drum and try and get people to check them out, because if you're a guitarist who likes metal, if you're a drummer, if you're a person that likes metal music, Piss and Razors should be a band that you listen to. And they're clearly, like, I've got a friend who listens to a lot of black metal, and we were chatting about like new releases that were coming out and all the rest, and I was like, I mean, he listed about 4 albums of what had come out that day, and he was all excited, and he was like showing around. I was like, that new Piss and Razors album. He was like, that who? He's a bit younger than me, right? Granted, he was like, who? I was like, Piss and Razors, groove metal band. He's like, I've never heard of them before. He's like, but the name has me in. And he loved them as well. So yeah, I think once you check them out, you will not be disappointed. And this is a very fucking poignant reminder of everything that's good with groove metal. Well played, Piss and Razors. For sure. So this one is out already. Go ahead, check it out. I'll put links below to their Facebook and their Bandcamp so you can check out the album. Not enough people know about this band, even though they've been on the go for so long. So do yourself a favour, check this album out. Go back and check out their back catalogue, which is now on all the digital streaming platforms, and give them some love. Piss and Razors, Eulogy Death March, out now. Check it out. Let us know what you think. Stick some comments in below if you've never heard the band before. Have a listen to it and let us know what you think. That is the review. Thanks for checking it out. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon. Bye, everyone.